So this is the first time that we were just saying. Actually, this is the first time we've had somebody on the channel that we don't actually know. So if you are new to the Data Protection Diaries, then welcome. If you are not new to the channel, then obviously welcome back. We appreciate you coming back. Today, we're talking to Gordon Wade. So Gordon Wade is currently the DPO and Regulatory Counsel for Hostelworld, which I believe is the biggest online review platform for hostels in the world.
Yeah, so we're essentially an online booking platform, and we operate very similarly to the likes of Booking.com or TripAdvisor, etc. So, but our focus is hostels. So our target market are gap year students, just kind of backpackers around the world. Much younger target market, I guess, than the likes of Booking or Hotels.com, etc.
Yeah, that's cool. I like the idea that you can travel the world on a budget, but you still care where you're going to go.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
You still want to know that it's going to be a safe place to go. Cool. So the format for this is fairly simple. As I say, we keep it fairly unscripted, so we just have a bit of a chat. If you're watching this and you enjoy it, please do give us a like, give us a comment, subscribe to the channel as well, because obviously it helps us just reach more people. But we're not going to waffle on about that, because obviously we're here to talk to Gordon. We're not here to just have a general waffle. So your experience from what I can see and what I've read about you is obviously your background is a lawyer. So you're England and Wales law, and you're also a New York attorney as well, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
So was this always your passion? Did you go into law and then move into privacy? Did it?
It's roundabout way kind of. So I qualified first in New York after my master's. I took the New York bar. I would have graduated smack in the middle of the recession, when as a young law graduate there were not many jobs going, particularly in Dublin. None of the law firms really were hiring as such. So for me, New York was just to give me a leg up into getting qualified, getting some experience, and have something to trade with in the market when otherwise things are pretty bleak. That got me spent a year then at Wilmer Hale in London, kind of about 2011, 2012. Just getting some experience. It was actually international commercial arbitration I was doing then, so quite a bit different to what I do now. But that gave me the springboard and some experience to come back to Ireland, to where I joined Mason Hayes & Curran. It was really there that I suppose gained the passion for privacy and data protection. And I suppose in secondary schools, our version of high school or A levels in the UK, I didn't know quite what I wanted as such, so I did a combined degree of business and law in UCD in Dublin to give a bit of a mix and see what I liked. It was going to be one or the other, and I kind of just liked the law and went down that route. And so I said, well, join Mason Hayes & Curran. Mason Hayes & Curran were then and still are Facebook's litigation counsel for all their privacy matters. So when I joined as a trainee and then I qualified there, but at the time it was around the first Schrems litigation. The GDPR had been published and drafted and came out, and then it was coming down the tracks for 2016. And they were building, Philip Nolan, who's the partner in there, was building a very robust privacy practice team. And with Facebook, they had Google, Twitter, LinkedIn, all the big tech companies were all clients. And like you couldn't get away from privacy and data protection going around the office. It was everywhere. Huge big clients, very cutting edge stuff. Not a lot other firms are doing it in the market. So it was kind of ingrained into me in my time there. So when I qualified there, I was there maybe about a year PQE, and then I was given the opportunity to join KPMG in their client facing their legal services side in Dublin, similar to what they have across the world. But part of the proviso of me joining was that I could develop new service lines, obviously make some more money, get some more clients. And because I knew at the time that the audit, the management consulting, the risk consulting guys were looking at doing like data protection audit work, pre-assessments, prep assessment for the GDPR coming into force. This was about into 15, 16, that I saw a bit of a gap there for having some legal support to the guys who were, on the boots on the ground auditors and consultants who are on the ground with clients doing the preparation assessment programs. So I figured, there's a bit of a gap there. The law firms can't directly compete in that market because they don't have the consultants and the auditors and the risk consultants, etc. So we kind of went from there. So I started, majority as a corporate lawyer for clients on tax restructurings and reorg work, and I gradually built the privacy side of my practice. Within about 6 months, I went from 70-30 in favor of corporate to the vice versa, 70% all privacy data protection work, and corporate became a very small part of what I did. And I just kind of steamrolled from there. I mean, I was going into a big brand with a lot of big old big clients, particularly the old Irish companies, the bread companies, the tea companies, all these really old ones. And then we had some US tech clients as well, a lot of some airlines and aircraft finance companies. So I kind of traded off the big name brand that KPMG had. So I was there for a bit over 3 years or so. And then I suppose quite randomly, the opportunity for another big audit firm, PwC, came for the Middle East. And I was offered the chance to go out there as a data privacy lawyer to build up their team. And because the GDPR was gradually starting to make ground over there, to companies were trying to take notice. A few local laws were either coming on board that were being published, like in Qatar, Bahrain, and Saudi, the DIFC in the UAE, and they were all kind of gaining traction, and PwC were building up the data privacy team. So I kind of jumped at that chance to go out there. So I spent about a year and a half out there. I came back a lot earlier than it was otherwise planned, but came back kind of for family reasons. But like out there, it was advising on the applicability of GDPR, which is much different focus to what I'd been used to. So when you're advising clients in Europe, the GDPR applies by default. That's not it's not a consideration. Whereas a lot of what we did with clients across the Middle East and the Gulf region was big assessments as to where and when the GDPR applies, where are they caught, where are they in scope, where are they not. So like a lot of us, that was the kind of first port of call. That does it apply or not, whereas at home you would never do those assessments, and the Article 2 assessments. So it's really interesting stuff, and I guess like work I hadn't done before simply because we didn't have those issues working in Europe. And then as the new laws, particularly the Bahrain Data Protection Law was published last year, came into force. Advising a lot of clients on applicability of that and benchmarking that against the GDPR and different requirements and where they differ to some extent. Was quite novel as a European lawyer for me, was the fact that under a lot of laws in the Gulf, there are penal sanctions for breaches of the law. So, people can go to prison for breaches of data protection law, which is something, you would never see here. You see more administrative fines and sanctions than anything else. So it's really interesting. And it's a fantastic market to work in, a great team. Richard Chudinsky in PwC, this was who I work with directly a lot of times. Fantastic, really great team. Again, worked with the risk guys, the cyber guys, the forensics guys, worked with the auditors, the consultants, a real mixed multidisciplinary team. So that for me, it gives you a breadth of experience. So, I could advise on the law, but that's a separate matter to implementing that in a commercial aspect and getting a program up and running to a business as usual state in a company, whereas lawyers you bring it to a point, and then when commercial considerations come in, we don't do commercial advisory kind of stuff. That's for the client to decide. But when you're on the ground as a consultant with clients, and we would have spent like weeks on site with clients, and they want commercial answers and they need commercial answers. Not just, they don't want to know what the law says, they want to know what to do because the law says what it says. That was really interesting, a really great experience. And I guess for me, like having 4 or 5 years of that at that point, when I was looking to come home, I looked at a bunch of different options, from law firms to a lot of time looking at privacy counsel. I loved the idea of going as in-house, so owning that privacy program, and again moving away from things like timesheets and billable hours and stuff, which I certainly don't miss. But I suppose being much closer to the action in terms of the commercial decisions and the risk decisions that you need to make, that when you're in the client advisory side, you don't make, for obvious reasons. They're usually for the clients. So that's what attracted me. So I spoke to a number of different companies, from big US tech firms to kind of more Irish firms, and kind of came across Hostelworld. And I, like a lot of people in my youth and when I was in college, I'd used the platform to travel around Europe and stuff like that. And I had never worked for an e-commerce company before. I didn't have a lot of experience with them. Like, our clientele just weren't that sort of nature, but it gave me a good mix. So I have as you said, role of DPO and legal counsel, which is a tricky one to balance at times. A lot of people would agree. A lot of people advise, maybe it's not the best mix, but I do manage to balance it well. I've got a great team, but it gives me that, so I'm a lawyer by training, so I didn't want to lose my legal experience and the ability to practice law, but I also wanted to keep going with my data protection experience as well. So it gives me that nice balance between being the DPO on one side and doing all the legal advisory on the other. So I guess that's a kind of a whistle stop journey from college through to where I am now.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Very often you don't tend to see a lot of divergence. You kind of get practitioners and you get lawyers. You don't often get that sort of divergence where people make that crossover to consultancy and then bring that experience back into what they're doing. One of the things that interests me is when you're looking at that kind of that conflict between being a lawyer and wanting to dress something as
Sorry, that's my dog's barking upstairs. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
I think the postman's arrived.
From a legal aspect, you're then trying to look at it from a consultative, from a commercial aspect. How do you address that balance for you as yourself? Do you approach different situations with a different mindset, or do you just try and look for that sort of balance in terms of risk and what you'd have to defend if you had to take it to court?
Yeah, I suppose the point is always having a defensible position. That's always your kind of all the decisions you make, a documented defensible position. So it's always very situation specific, but I guess there are times where I come at it with my legal hat on. As to when I'm dealing with, say, a lot of third party suppliers and we're going through these in-depth master services agreements with quite bulky data protection provisions in them. The lawyer in me will kind of battle for all the proper protections that should be in there and everything else. But at the same time, I've always believed that data protection should never be an inhibitor to me making progress, to moving with client innovation and tech, particularly in our industry where you cannot slow down, you can't be held up because your competitors just kind of overtake you. So you need to, in an in-house environment, perhaps far more so than an advisory side, you need to be fully up to speed with what's the risk appetite, what are the commercial considerations, what's the end goal, what does the company want from this, and you have to kind of adapt on a case by case basis. I mean, like when I previously in advisory, like my Bible would have always been the GDPR and the recitals and the guidance from the EDPB, and that's my little Bible, my go-to for anything I would do, any client work, for obvious reasons because you're advising on the law. But now the law is perhaps almost a secondary consideration for a lot of what I do. My Bible is our annual report because we're a public company, publicly traded. So that will give me all the commercial strategic information I need to know that this is the end goals. Here's where we're going. We're a data company. We're a data company. We just happen to allow people to book hostels on our platform, but our bread and butter, our core values in the data that we hold. We've over 7 million customers, a lot of personal data. We do a lot of really clever things to try and enhance customer journeys and from analytics to everything. So that's all the really interesting stuff we do. But for me, it's make sure that what we do in a data protection compliance perspective supports that and helps us achieve those goals rather than really stymies it and holds it back. And that's really the focus I have to bring to every situation. I mean, but then again, the lawyer in me wants to be quite strict, and I am, like things like DPIAs, for example. I'm very strict on these are carried out. We're carrying them out left, right, and center all the time because I, as a lawyer, more risk averse than say some consultants would be, but that's what, that's my experience. That's my hat on. I want to make sure we have a good defensive position no matter what all decisions that we make. So we're onboarding some really, really clever new technologies and new aspects to our platform. But at every point is that where we're not sure and where there's just document the decisions, carry out assessments, stress them and test them. And that's really how I approach any of the kind of new processing operations or new technologies we're looking at.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's always this sort of debate that the practitioners take the sort of take the more risk-based approach, and then the lawyer takes the hard line. This is what the regs say. There's no divergence. Let's not mess around. It's not safe. So it's cool that you've got that sort of that balance and that understanding, and you can address things in a way that gives you what you believe is your defensible position, but also allows you to have a bit of commercial now sort of and accept that there's a commercial risk appetite. People want to do things, organizations want to do stuff. You've got shareholders, you want to make money. So because you're obviously based in Dublin in Ireland, so Helen Dixon and the Information Commissioner's office there, or the are known for being a bit more relaxed in terms of their activities and their enforcement activities. One of the challenges that many people are saying in the UK is that the regulator isn't being effective enough. The ICO isn't creating enough enforcement action. They're just not producing enough guidance. They're not being helpful enough. What's your experience been like with the Irish regulator? Do you feel that they're in a good position, because obviously a lot of tech companies move there because they're the perception is that it's a safer place to be and it's a more engaging place to be. Do you get to engage much with the commissioner? Do you find them beneficial? Do you think they're effective over there?
Yeah, so and like it's been the criticism, I guess, for want of a better phrase, that Helen Dixon and the DPC and team have received over the past 2 years, particularly from the German regulators who've said the Irish Commission is very much dragging their feet. I see both sides of the story. I mean, from everyone else, you have the Keneal came out with the fine on Google, and the ICO have the British Airways and the Marriott fines, and there's even down to the Hungarian, the Belgian, the Dutch regulators are all imposing fines kind of left, right, and centre. And to date, Ireland, the DPC has issued one against a public authority in Ireland. So I guess, luckily, I've had very little interaction with our Data Protection Commission to date, because I suppose as a DPO and as lead counsel, you don't want to hear from them. You don't want to be talking to them. You don't want there to be problems. But I would know them from kind of the circuit, from around town, from talking, going to conferences, and you meet the people and everything else. And obviously, I think they're very proactive in terms of guidance. They've been good at issuing guidance. There was a huge consultation published kind of at the end of last year, start of this year. A lot of it now has obviously been delayed as a result of COVID. But they're doing the right things. The good guidance is getting published out there. That's getting noted like around Europe. I think the DPC is known as one of the better regulatory bodies for issuing guidance for companies and for individuals. There's a lot coming down the track. Helen Dixon spoke at a couple of conferences this week, which I watched online, and there's an awful lot coming down the track between, there's a collective consultation going out about Twitter from the DPC to the other concerned supervisory authorities. All the big tech companies now are awaiting decisions. I think WhatsApp had their findings from the DPC shared with them this week for their comment. What I think the DPC aim to do, and I guess it's something I would agree with, that rather than fine or impose sanctions for the sake of it, or to look optically good, or because it's the done thing now because everybody else is doing it, their position has always been, like me as a lawyer, I want a defensible position. They want a decision that's not going to be subject to appeal. It's not going to be overturned in court. It's fully backed up and defensible for them, and that, you know, there's going to be no questions asked when those fines and sanctions come down. That has always been their approach, and to follow, you know, the rule of law and to follow what they're required to do. So I think they've been relatively quiet on that front for the last 2 years. But I think 2020, and as the rest of this year passes and into next year, things will speed up a lot. And I think we're going to see some big decisions coming from Helen Dixon and team, and that will kind of change the playing field. I don't think it's necessarily that they're gone light touch. It's just that, you know, this isn't the sphere that they've really operated in before, because we never had monetary fines in Ireland from the DPC like the UK. The ICO had, you know, 500,000 up to maximum, where we, you know, Ireland did not offer that under the previous directive. So it's a relatively new thing for them to consider. The ICO also has 450 plus people in there. You know, we went from 6 in a small office over a shop in the Midlands of Ireland to, I think they're at 130 now, with a view to going up to 170 by year end. So it's a much smaller regulator, and yet we have, like, everyone's here: Facebook, Google, Apple, Microsoft, Twitter, PayPal, Amazon. They're all based here. So I think they're trying to bulk up, hire lots of lawyers, hire lots of technologists, subject matter experts. I think they've had to do it in quite a short space of time, with, I think, budgets having, like, requests for higher budgets and those being turned down by government. So they have a greater uphill battle, I guess, than other regulators around Europe.
Yeah, it's almost like it's like the poster boy situation when, say, people say regulators struggle to catch up. Hang on, where we am I getting loads of weird? Oh, there we go. When people say that regulators struggle to keep up with the changes in technology, you know, if you're talking about a regulator that's gone from having 6 staff to 130 and is then responsible for Amazon, Facebook, WhatsApp, PayPal, Twitter, you know, organizations that hold huge swathes of information and move at an incredibly fast rate and have access to almost infinite resources in terms of knowledge, technical support, you know, legal expertise. It's a massive challenge for an organisation like that to take on. So the hostel world side of things is quite interesting to me, because obviously you guys are a platform business, so you don't make money out of the website. You make money out of the information that you consume. Like, everybody's bored of COVID, obviously, but it's for an organisation like yours. How is it surviving? How is it changing? Is there what happens next? Is it just literally just waiting for people to go back out? Are you trying to create comfort in the business so that it's still there when things come back out? I mean, are you dependent on travel? Are you self-dependent? How does it work?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose we're in one of those industries where, you know, our industry took an enormous hit. You know, so we're a company that's based on the premise that people travel to other places in the world and stay in hostels. You know, so I mean, worldwide traffic reduced 99% over the last few months. So yeah, I mean, that affected everybody. Online travel would be absolutely no different. So yeah, like, our monetization comes from people making bookings. You know, you book a hostel, we, in the facilitation of that model, that's how we make the money from it. And, you know, if people aren't booking, hostels aren't getting any money in, and we're not getting money in ourselves either. It's been an awful big change. But I joined in January, so I was mid-January. So mid-January to mid-March, 2 months in the office. You know, I suppose getting to know everybody, getting to know the business, from, you know, its virtual layout to its physical layout, everything, and getting all the team members and who my team would be, and then bang smack mid-March, and we were gone to remote working, and the office has been closed since. So it's been a very big change, but like, the remote working brings all its own challenges. But what we've been doing, I guess, is giving comfort, and we're taking the time now to, I guess, the things we put on the long finger, because like Hostelworld had kind of engaged in some quite active acquisitions and investments over the last couple of years to build up our technology, our tech and platform offering to our traveling customers, and certain things put on the long finger, but obviously that all really kind of dried up and went dead over the last since it's really started the year, since COVID. So now we're looking at adding new features and new product types to our bookings, so that when people start traveling again, there's new products and offerings there that weren't there before, that are really very geared at the customer. There's more supports for hostels. We set up virtualhostel.com, which is like a virtual hostel where people can go into rooms, have chats, they can do cookery demonstrations, do yoga, but with hostels in, South Vietnam or across in Bali or in South America. And then we set up initiatives with hostels where people were trapped in countries. Your Irish travelers in Australia could not get home during COVID because of lockdowns, and they had nowhere to go. And backpackers, like they're not 5-star hotel type people. They're all on a budget, and they're there with their shorts, flip flops, and a backpack kind of thing. So, and it was reaching out to our hostel community, which is huge, to help these people who are stranded otherwise. To put them up in hostels, which again were otherwise pretty empty because no one else was traveling. So it's creating a support community. I mean, our traveling customers are our absolute bread and butter. They are core to our business. But then on the other side, so are our partner hostels. Without them, no one's going to book through us, because you don't have the list and the portfolio of properties around the world. So it's an interesting time, and it's one where like companies, particularly e-commerce platforms, we need to innovate and think of new solutions, new offerings, new things we can do. So there's some exciting things happening in the background, which I get to be really centrally involved in with our tech and product team guys. Like, a lot of the stuff that they do is like kind of just wizardry to me. They can just do incredibly clever things with technology. But luckily it's a company that's had an ethos of data privacy from the very beginning. And it came under new management over the last couple of years, with a new CEO, new CFO, new CTO, all very much with, our data is our lifeblood. So, data is the most important thing we have. So it's security and everything else, all the data protection requirements that needs to sit with that data are forefront to our minds. I report to the board. During COVID, it was almost on a weekly basis what we're doing. Okay, we're remote working now. What are technologies? What's our security like? We're moving into more video conferencing. Okay, what platforms are we using? Are we doing our due diligence on them? We've all heard of a couple of platforms who have had shaky, if best, data security features around the rooms, etc. So I mean, I banned a couple of them across the company, across all offices. We have offices in Dublin, London, Shanghai, Porto, and Sydney, and a few of them were banned from use because I just didn't trust it. It wasn't the security wasn't there, the safety wasn't there for our people, particularly now when at a time for a public company where a lot of any insider information is very, very valuable for a publicly traded company, and just making sure we were as secure as we could possibly be. So it's been like a super interesting time and a challenging time, going from the Middle East in Dubai. I lived on the beach. It was pretty, it was nice and relaxed. We had great clients. I did loads of travel. I was in Bahrain on a weekly basis, in Saudi and Qatar, to home and into lockdown. So it was, but it's been great. Like I wouldn't trade it for anything, in terms of experience.
Yeah, no, it sounds awesome. Yeah. Like in terms of getting to see things and getting to experience things, like I don't think you could ask for more. And lockdown has created as many opportunities, I think, as it has possibly taken away in a lot of instances.
No, absolutely.
When you talk about your time in the UAE, obviously there's sort of fragmented bits of privacy law coming through. There's no obviously federal law in place. How do you find, like, do you feel like you have to sell it to people? Were companies there, because if they don't have to do it, is there any interest to do it, or do they want to keep up with the rest of the world? Is that it's an interesting one, and it did kind of evolve. Now, like, I wasn't even there that long. I was only there about a year and a half, but even in that time, it evolved
from when I was there at the start, you were look, you're advising clients, you're selling a business. So you're trying to sell your advices and get them to come on board and spend all this money for all this great information you can provide them with. But at the end of the day, when there's no legal requirement to do so, you're relying on them, wanting to kind of keep up with the Joneses, what are other companies doing, what else are doing, but then, a big setting point, and consumers are becoming far more sensitive to it now, is, people want to know that the data is going to be secure. The customer base are going to expect a certain level of, they're going to want to see privacy notices and cookie statements and, asking for consents where previously weren't required. Companies were kind of going to become cognizant that that's becoming to be expected in the market, and then, at government level, because, I suppose I had the chance, the opportunity to speak with a lot of government departments in the UAE who work on trailblazing the data protection, data privacy framework for the country. And I would have seen and done a bit of work on the federal law, which obviously since moving back I've kind of lost track on, but when I left it was a couple of steps away from being implemented into law at national level. I'd say it's just been slowed down since. But that even being said, in the last 2 weeks, the new DIFC law has come into force. And again, I was on a steering committee who had worked on that, really interesting, and developed to kind of be a hybrid GDPR CCPA sort of law, taking the best features from both and amalgamating them into one. Laurie Baker in the DFC and Dino Wilkinson in Clyde & Co worked a lot on that, and just really, really clever stuff, very innovative. Probably the first law in the world to have all those different features. But that's where they're getting at now. There are some sectors and they're the free zones. For example, DFC is a free zone that are really up to speed, and they want continuity, legal certainty, and kind of business as usual for those big tech companies who will come in, set up, hire people, spend tons of money. If you want to get Facebook into your country, you're going to need to have very up-to-date, up-to-speed data protection laws, or any of those tech companies. And that's always the one. It's to attract business, bring in the foreign investment. And to do that, they're going to want some certainty around the market. And for like a data company, they're going to need to know and understand the data protection laws. So for them, GDPR was just the default. Okay, like I saw a couple of the national laws that were in draft form across the UAE and were copy and paste the GDPR. Some of the terminology hadn't even been changed. But you can see they just want they want to do what they can to attract business and make themselves competitive in the market. Across the UAE, you have these huge hubs. Dubai, obviously, you have Abu Dhabi, you've got Bahrain, Riyadh, and Saudi. They want business to come into their setup, spend the money, hire their workforce, make them a real attractive place to do business. And huge driver behind that were the laws enforced.
Makes good sense. It's nice to see because when we started, or certainly when I started, like nobody really cared. It was a data protection, information governance was for the healthcare sector, it was for pharmaceuticals. And just watching the last 2 or 3 years and watching the global interest come in, like it's good to see that actually the viewpoint is that if you want to do good business, then you're going to have to follow the same rules as everybody else, or you need to entice people to come here, which is why I think obviously everyone's so keen to go to Dublin, and Dublin's exploded from a tech perspective in the last sort of 4 or 5 years, which is really cool to see. I don't want to keep flitting over into, but things keep popping into my head, and then I think, that's a good one. When you talked about the sort of the involvement of the team at Hostelworld, so sort of the concept that it is built on privacy, and they get the idea that the information is what's important and what's key. Do you get the same interaction from the users, so from the people that use the portal? Because in my assumption, they're going to be younger than me anyway. Sort of your average student traveller 18 to mid 20s who now have much more of an interest in how their information is being used and whether they're being treated properly and having kind of access. Do you get that feeling from the user base of Hostelworld?
I do very much. But like a lot of them say, from my experience of dealing with clients previously, much more, for example, I had a couple of tea companies and bread companies in previous guises with KPMG, who don't, those companies don't have young user bases, and people aren't submitting access requests or doing this sorts of thing, or even banks to a certain extent. So I've dealt with a lot of banks. So what I see is we get a lot of access requests. A lot of them are these automated requests where you bang your email into a portal and it'll fire erasure requests left, right, and center. You get an awful lot of those, and that's I guess any tech company does. But I suppose I deal with our customer service team kind of own the customer journey, the customer experience. So I'd work really closely with our head of customer service on all the access requests. And you get a lot, but I suppose for us, we've had a really great history, with dealing with or complying with our data protection obligations under the previous act and now under GDPR, and our interactions with the regulator when they did happen. Thankfully, not yet in my time. So I'd say we get a lot more than some companies, but I don't think we're anything at the level of the real big tech US tech companies. And because a lot of their requests and a lot of their interactions with customers can be quite antagonistic, and there's a lot of people just don't agree with what they do. Particularly because you pull back the curtains and it's still not quite clear what's actually happening. Where's the data going? Who's got access to it? Are you securing it? Is it being left in password unprotected open databases that are let open for the public? These sorts of security incidents that you read about that these big tech companies have. What we do basically is to enable a person to book a hostel, and obviously we do our own marketing and analytics on top of that to enhance the journey, to get to know our user. Core to us is to know each traveler has their own profile of their own likes, dislikes, what they want. That for us is the key thing we need to get into, is to understand their mindset and offer the best packages, offer the best services to them as possible. So not very little of what we do, or if anything is what we do, is circumspect. It's simply just value added services, and there's no sharing going on. We fully PCI compliant. The relationship is as between the customer and the hostel, and we're kind of the middleman who facilitates that relationship to happen. But they're certainly more active. But I suppose for me, I believe in the spirit of the GDPR and the value system it has and what it wants to do. So for that sense, it's important that comes across in our documentation, what we put out there, the message we give to our customers, how the steps we take to protect their data, and they're aware of what we do, how we do it, why we do it. That's for me is really important. And I think that resonates with a lot of young consumers, and they understand what we're talking about. Whereas if I would talk to my mother about data protection and everything else, it kind of glazes over. So it's not a concept that generation are familiar with. It was never a concern. Whereas the younger generation is like, no, what you're asking for or what you're doing, that's not okay. And no, you cannot do that. Yeah,
transparent. I think transparency becomes key, isn't it? I think people care, pay more of an interest. I've given up trying to explain to my mum what I do. She just tells me that I need to rip my address off the credit card statement, put that in the bin, and then shred everything else. That's her. As long as you do that, you're safe. Everything's going to be cool. So I don't want to keep you too much longer, but I suppose the one of the thing, given your experience and your insights in sort of world privacy law, European law, what do you see the sort of next 2 years? So we've done the 2-year marker for GDPR, and I think it's gone well. Countries have picked up on it. Where do you think the next 2 years are going to take us? Do you think other countries are going to start bringing out their own laws? Do you think we're going to see a bit more of a general consensus across the board?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's going to be probably more of a global shift towards a consensus, and arguably there already is, because you look at India had the new data protection law that was brought out. Nigeria had one recently. I think Jamaica have one in the works. A lot of them are based on the GDPR. I know from my experience across the UAE, all the laws are basically as a default at a level of the GDPR. So you're getting a worldwide consensus. I think COVID has I wouldn't say derail, but certainly knocked the rail to a side and given rise to a whole different set of circumstances, processing operations, considerations that hadn't been envisaged in January, for example. So from a regulatory perspective, I would have said, 2020, 2021 for the Irish regulator is going to be all about enforcement. These are the years now where Facebook is going to get fined and the big tech companies are going to get kind of brought to bear. I think that's been different now. They're going to have to look at a lot of new technologies are coming out, the contact tracing apps, everything, all this sort of thing that just wasn't there before. And they're going to be a big focal point. I mean, there's EDPB guidance on a weekly basis. There's, government decisions going to go with contact tracing technologies between Google and Apple and everything else, so that's going to be a big focus. And coronavirus is not going away anytime soon. We're already mid 2020, so a couple of months of summer, autumn, winter, you're probably going to get a COVID-20 most likely, or a different strain variation. This isn't just going to end. And so all these considerations with contact tracing and the data to be giving over are just going to be either multiplied or just going to be there. So they have to be dealt with, and the technologies and software around it have to be dealt with, and all the measures that companies are going to be required to take, and the testing from a compliance perspective of the reasons why you're required to collect data or ask these questions or have this information are going to be tested. Like when we go back to an office environment, which we probably will maybe about September, and probably not before that, will we have temperature checking? Will that be required? Will we have thermal imaging CCT cameras to do that? There's going to be quite invasive enough questionnaires to ask of all employees about where have you been, how are you feeling, what's your temperature, have you been sick, and then can you tell other people that someone has had COVID? And it has been guidance on that, but I think it'll be interesting. The regulatory enforcement will continue, so we're going to see some big decisions, I think, from a lot of the regulators, Irish one included, but you're going to see investigations and enforcement, I think, on companies' reactions to COVID, how they've dealt with the move to remote working, the different business model they've had to adopt, the really quick need to, we need new technology, we need it now, perhaps to the detriment of proper due diligence and proper, just kind of pre-checking that you would have had before. Onboarding a new technology platform could take months usually, and companies had to do it in weeks or days. So I think when things get back to semi-normal and there's more of a regular working environment, I think we're going to see a lot of that really focus on those compliance issues, and it's going to be very, very interesting. And then companies moving to, I know some people working in companies who the office is gone, never to be seen again. We are now remote working as a rule, rather than an exception, and that brings about all different considerations on data security and everything else. So you may even see the Irish regulator did a cookie sweep recently this year, a big report on all the different cookie statements and the providers and how companies are providing that information on their cookies and how they operate. You could get into the point where you're going to have sweeps on video conferencing providers, on the technology platforms that lay that. So just to see, how's that working? Because that's going to be such a norm now. It's going to be a default position. So it'll be an interesting time. I think you get a mixed bag of different things happening. But all the while across the world, I think GDPR still is that standard to be attained, or to be looked at.
Yeah, I think the home working thing, I think you could do so much and go into so much about it. If it does become the norm, I just don't think businesses are ready for what that really, really means in terms of technical security, in terms of training, in terms of awareness. And it's all right short term, and you get that sort of lapse between workspace and home space, and it's all right short term, but long term, the misunderstanding of the lack of control that you have over how your employees are using information, how they're sharing it, where they're storing it, I think has a risk of being a massive one. But yeah, we could go on about that for. Yeah,
and I'd agree. For me, it's what would be so important is the mindset of employees, and the training around that. Particularly, you're onboarding new staff now who would otherwise, our staff would undergo quite detailed data security training and data protection and cyber training and just awareness sessions to around all this, but it's much more difficult now, and those will be hands-on sessions in the office. So now they're all being done virtually, so it's not really the same. It's hard to really drive that home. And you know, in the office environment, everyone's there. We're an open plan office, so you know, we're all right beside each other. You know, there's norms and practices that you do for data security and everything else. But at home, it's, you know, it's kind of a free for all. You can't control what people do, so they need to know, right? These are the basic norms that we require and that is expected of you when you're working, and it's going to be a real challenge to kind of get that across and get employees, you know, adhering to that when they're like me in the back bedroom upstairs, you know, and just, you know, you can't use such and such video conferencing platform because it's just not bloody safe. I don't really care that it's easier or it's better because you can see everyone on the screen at the same time. That's neither here nor there. You know, if you're on work calls, security and non-infiltration, unauthorized access is the absolute primary consideration, not its ease of use or even its bandwidth capability. Yeah, you know, that's for me is so important.
Yeah, and that's it. And you look at, you talked about how Hostelworld was built on that sort of privacy mindset and has that culture ingrained in it. But part of that comes from being around people and being around senior management and seeing your exec teams and being able to go to risk committees and exec committees, and as a DPO being able to express your concerns face to face where people can feel it. Whereas, you know, trying to create a culture over a video chat,
it's difficult.
You never get to really know anybody, do you? So I think it's going to be a really interesting couple of years.
It will. I kind of made it a point from at the very beginning, from like the week that I knew we were going to remote working. So I was, you know, really close to our IT teams looking at that, how that migration is going to take place. Like I've kind of been on a company-wide email every week saying, here are the latest updates. Here's some tips to work from home. Here's some tips to sharing data. Here's some tips to using video conferencing. If you're working from, you know, a coffee shop, or you're working remotely, you're not at home, whatever, other people are around. Here's some, you know, just basic tips and hints as to how to be secure. Even down to like guidance. Okay, guys, when you were back to the office, here's what you can expect. During this time, you know, if there's a possibility you have to tell us that you have had COVID or have had symptoms, whatever, okay, well, here's what we'll do with that information. Here's who will access it. Who's who we may have to share it with. Here's why. Just making it's that transparency thing. So people have to know. But for me, coming from me on a weekly basis, they can't avoid it because it gets banged into their email. So it's like, guys, this is clearly important. You know, every week we have an update from our CEO as to what's happening with the company, what's happening in the market with our hostels. Every week they get an update from me as well, saying like, here's, you know, for example, like there's if we have contact tracing apps coming in. Okay, guys, well, here's what they in English. Here's what they will do. Here's how they're going to impact you, and here's what everyone's talking about when they mean that. You know, just to try and bring everyone to speed and to emphasize that this is important stuff to us as a company. You know, and it's trying to get that ethos where you can't be, you know, walking around the office, you know, singing all the praises for data protection.
Yeah, and that's it. There's a lot to be said, and whenever I was in house, I always made sure that rather than to phone somebody or email them, I'd get up, go and sit with them. You know, I love a whiteboard. I love being able to sketch things out and draw things out, and you know, I'm quite handsy, as you can probably tell, and not having, I don't know, I can think. So hard to convey that and have that kind of relationship, you know, when you're in that home working environment. So I think it's going to be fascinating to see what happens. So. For sure, yeah. But that has been awesome. I thoroughly enjoyed that. No, thank you so much. Like, thanks for asking me. It was an absolute pleasure. I certainly think of worse things than to talk about data protection for an hour of a Friday. So thank you so much. It's been a delight. I was really, really privileged to be asked. Cool. Well, thank you for coming on. We'll put obviously Hostelworld details below. For anyone that isn't already following on LinkedIn, I would suggest that you go and have a look at Gordon on LinkedIn. We'll put his profile down below as well, because you've always got fantastic insights into what's going on and to case law and things like that. And I know myself and a lot of the other DPOs pick up a lot of stuff from from what you put out. So make sure you go and check out Gordon's LinkedIn on there. But for now, and from the team at Data Protection Diaries, Gordon, thank you very much. And no doubt we'll speak to you again soon.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Take care.